Hello, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live for Monday, the 13th of January, 2025. We are 1 week away from the inaugural, and I've already had a call this morning with one of our training programs where folks are just really struggling and legitimately struggling with how we're going to handle what's coming. So I'm going to spend some time talking about that today, but we also have lots of other breaking news and action items that we need to attend to and things that you can do today to help battle back against what's coming. So first things first, today for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a white top with a black blazer over top of it. My hair is pulled back. I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman, and my thick gold hoops are in. And I'm in my office in front of a bookshelf and a cart and a poster and a lot of other things. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Thanks for being here. Hi, Scotland. It's always nice to see our international viewers in the house. Okay, so we're 1 week away, and it feels like we're already in it. And I know that there's an enormous amount of anxiety building about what's to come. And one of the things that is just so dangerous about where we find ourselves right now is that we don't actually know how all of this is going to play out. All of the things that we've been doing, that I hope you've been doing since the election itself to organize in your local community, are really at this moment quite urgent, particularly if you're doing things that are based in immigration protection work, or you're aligning with organizations that are doing on the ground work to support migrants who are present in your own community. We know, because we know already that early immigration raids are being carried out in certain parts of California, that there will be an almost instantaneous exercise of authority by CBP to round people up, put them in camps, or just flat out deport them. Tom Homan, will be, the new head of ICE, attempted to walk this back a little bit this weekend. But I will just tell you that at the same time that he was walking it back on the talk shows, trying to apparently appease various folks in corporate America who are worried about not being able to keep their doors open if migrant labor is rounded up, nonetheless then went on to post on social media various platforms about how Inauguration Day was deportation day. And so, I think we have to take them at their word. And I know for many folks, this is a point of real concern and worry. And I'll just say that in addition to that, I think the emotional preparation for what we're about to encounter is important, as is our own organizing work. And I will just repeat something that I said this morning to our ongoing cohort of the Dual Power Accelerator. Reminder, our second cohort is open for registration now, and you can join us at the link running on the banner below here or in the box below. And I'll also drop a link at the top when we're done with the live. One of the things I said to that group this morning is that one of the things to remember about community organizing is that it's not just about creating financial security for people who are food or housing insecure, or creating physical safety for communities that are under threat. It's also about creating emotional safety for everyone in need, right? And so that means that your anxiety and your fear will be quelled in part by being in community with others who are taking action in the right direction. I also will just say to everyone that I think that this is an extremely important moment to be checked into your own physiological responses to what we're going to be seeing in the news over the next week and beyond. I think it's incredibly critical that if you find yourself overwhelmed, scared, reacting on social media to things that people are putting out there, particularly if it's really like doomsday kind of stuff, like it's all over, all hope is lost, there's nothing we can do, we're effed. You see things like that quite a bit. I'm not convinced, by the way, that's not trolling to get people to stay home and do nothing. You should feel free to turn off the social media platforms. Like, seriously, check out. Many of you know, if you're following me on social media, that I did this all day on Saturday. I literally spent the entire day on Saturday on the couch with my kids watching Netflix. I did not pick up my phone the entire day. And I will tell you that by the end of Saturday night, I felt a lot better for having connected with my kids and, spent some time cocooned in our apartment than I probably would have felt if I'd spent the whole day scrolling through everything on social media. One of the key features of this moment is to remember that social media thrives on division, on cultivating outrage, and on creating circumstances where our emotions are elevated. Like they're literally hijacking our central nervous systems for profit. You do not have to play along. And in fact, we've got enough to worry about right now with this incoming administration and plenty of work to do in our own communities to organize that we desperately actually need to stay emotionally regulated to accomplish that work. So this is a moment to really think about what are your emotional strategies going to be for, let's just say, the rest of the month. I shared on our Progressive Coffee Hour for our Patreon subscribers over the weekend that I have taken back up my longstanding meditation practice since the election. And I get up at like 4:45, 5 a.m., not that you have to do that, to meditate every single day. And it actually allows me to get my day off on a very regulated start. I also journal now every morning in a hard journal. Just a little reminder, digital safety is a real concern right now. If you're going to be writing down your innermost thoughts about this administration, you might want to do it on paper. I encourage you to decide right now with what you're going to do in the next little while to keep yourself regulated. And some of this is going to have to do with managing anxiety. Some of it's going to have to do with being in community with people that you trust. And some of it's going to have to do with how are you organizing to be a part of the solution. So I really want folks to grasp that this is not optional at this moment in time, okay? Part of the problem is that, and again, I'm just giving you guys a little bit of a share of what I talked about this morning in our current cohort of the Dual Power Accelerator. One of the things that we have to consider right now is that it's very easy in this moment to get wrapped up in like end of days thinking, right? It's very easy to get stuck in this space, and it will be easy to get stuck in this space when they start carrying some of this out to see what the reaction is, to really get into this place of withdrawing and isolation and fear. And that's actually like the exact opposite of what we need to do. We need to figure out ways to take care of ourselves, to self-regulate, to engage in practices that are going to keep us grounded, and then to actually take action where we live, even if it's just in small ways, right? Like making a donation to your local food bank. You don't even have to do this locally. There's plenty of mutual aid needs right now in Los Angeles. I've got stuff pinned to my Blue Sky feed if you need to find it. The Mutual Aid of Los Angeles, like global organization, is in desperate need of donations, supplies. Don't donate your broken stuff. Don't donate your dirty stuff, right? I have to remind everybody, there was something going around this morning on Blue Sky about making sure that you're maintaining respect for people in need. But there's desperate need for support in various ways in the form of mutual aid in Los Angeles. And I'm just going to say one other thing. Mutual aid is like the theme of at least the next 2 years. Because if you're not engaging in strategies of dual power, which by the way is about building systems that run parallel to those in government as they collapse, that provide safety, security, and solidarity for people where you live, okay? Mutual aid is one form of dual power. If you are not building mutual aid and dual power where you live, you're actually not doing what I think anybody who can should be doing right now in terms of building alternative safety nets. So please make sure that you're taking an opportunity right now. This is a really good week to do it, to figure out how you're going to get involved in even a small way. Maybe it is a donation to your local food bank. Maybe it is signing up for a call with your local immigration rights action network. Maybe it's volunteering at your local abortion clinic to do escort work or to create post-abortion care packets or to find a way to become an advocate for abortion rights. Maybe it's just showing up at your local school board meeting to make sure there's no Moms for Liberty shenanigans afoot. So there's all sorts of ways to get involved, but I will tell you that your action right now is the thing that is going to help you cope with where we are headed. All right. So that's my best advice right now. And I really do think that we have to be intentional about this. This is a moment to be very conscious about the choices we are making, about how we're going to face down what's coming. And I will just also add that being in community with other people who are in the same place, this is one thing that is like maybe the best thing. I think the whole thing is great, but maybe one of the best things about the Dual Power Accelerator is that it's 200 plus people all in the same room on 2 calls every week, sharing strategy and ideas about how to actually organize and coalesce and do good in the world. And that's something that can make you like incredibly optimistic about the future, even when we're facing down autocracy, and violence and threat. So please do whatever you can where you live to make an impact and get involved, but also make really conscious choices right now about what you're going to do to maintain your mental health over the next little window of time, because God knows we're all going to need it. All right. We do have some action items for this week that are really critical. So many of you asked me last week about cabinet confirmation hearings, and we now have some news on that. So Pete Hegseth's first confirmation hearing is going to be tomorrow morning on the Hill. You all know my thoughts about Pete Hegseth. I have not been shy about those. But also, I think we all know what the story is here. He's a man with white nationalist tattoos. He very clearly has a serious drinking problem. He's somebody who's been accused of rape. This is a moment to make your voices heard. Call your senators on the Hill, even if they are far right wing. Tell them you are a constituent. Tell them that you are opposed to them voting to confirm Pete Hegseth, that he is a danger to the Department of Defense. He is a danger to our national security. He has enough of his own personal issues that actually make him a national security threat himself. And we need at this point to be very vocal about our thoughts about this nomination in particular. Wednesday morning is the first of Pam Bondi's confirmation hearings. And I will just remind you all, she is the former Attorney General of the state of Florida. She is in the pocket of far right-wing business interests. As the Attorney General, she is being appointed to turn the DOJ into Trump's own personal law firm to carry out litigation against his enemies, his perceived enemies, and to engage in political litigation against his perceived political opponents. This is an incredibly critical position in this administration. And, you know, I know it's better than Matt Gaetz. Don't get me wrong. But I will tell you that I don't think Pam Bondi is much of a step up. And frankly, the place that we need to be on all of this is being incredibly vocal, making phone calls. Do not send emails. Do not try to text message your representatives, your senators rather. Please make phone calls, because phone calls are logged in the offices of senators by their staff. And the number of calls that they get and the messages that you speak to their aides are going to be recorded and conveyed to the senator. Phone calls are the way to go on this. So if you don't know who your senator is, you should, but look it up. And then look up the Capitol switchboard and ask when you are connected to be connected to the office of your senator. All right. Do not neglect to tell the staff that you are a voting constituent of the senator. Okay, this is really critical. They may ask for your zip code. Please provide it. They want to know that you live in the state that they represent. And this is also one way, by the way, to make sure that you are kind of gumming up the works to the point that you can't not be heard, because the staff time that it takes for their aides to answer those phone calls is something that eventually makes its way to the senator's desk. So please, even if you know they're all in on MAGA, call them and make your voice heard. It's critical. The pressure matters. All right. And by the way, if you know your senator is going to vote against this, you should call them and thank them, because they also need to hear from us. They need to hear that they've got our support in the work that they're doing. All right. Make sure that your hard blue senator who is not in favor of having a white nationalist, alleged rapist with white nationalist tattoos and a drinking problem in charge of the Department of Defense hears from you that you are thankful for their viewpoint and their support of not putting him in charge of the world's most lethal military. All right. Please do it. Please do it. It's really important this week. Do it more than once. And this is going to be an action item that we're going to be talking about more and more on this broadcast. It's incredibly critical to do this. By the way, it will also make you feel better because you're doing something to protect democracy. Okay. We are waiting on the Jack Smith report. For those of you who missed it, we have a little bit of a kerfuffle here that is still ongoing with regard to the release of Volume 1 and the release of Volume 2. Many of you know that the 11th Circuit ruled late last week that Jack Smith's report could be released to the general public. What they did not do was lift Judge Cannon's 3-day stay on the release of those materials pending their order. Okay. They did not. I have to make this very clear. Patreon subscribers already know this. They did not rule in favor of Judge Cannon. There's a little bit of misinformation out there about this. All they did was not lift the 3-day stay. Okay. And that's not the end of the world, because the 3 days is up today. So we should be seeing the first volume of the report at minimum at some point today. In addition to that, the 11th Circuit does have an emergency appeal to lift the stay from Jack Smith's team. He has now resigned, by the way, so it is still his ongoing litigation team, but he is no longer the special counsel. And Judge Cannon did this insane thing over the weekend, not surprisingly, of issuing an order over an arena in which she has literally no jurisdiction, asking whether or not Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira were mentioned in the first volume of the report. It's an unlawful order. Again, it's something that the 11th Circuit will not stand for, I suspect. But in any event, at the moment, we are expecting to at least see Volume 1 today. We shall see. Okay, I do want to mention very briefly what's happening in North Carolina, because this is something that should be on everyone's radar. So many of you know that Allison Riggs, who was running for the North Carolina Supreme Court, won her election against a fellow by the name of Jefferson Griffin. I had to write this down so I wouldn't forget. It's like such a Confederate name. Jefferson Griffin in North Carolina by a slim 700 plus votes. Griffin then went to his buddies on the North Carolina Supreme Court and asked them to order a recount and to throw out 60,000 ballots in North Carolina, which literally, like the basis of which has been rejected by the state elections board and by the Court of Appeals. But he's still asking for it. North Carolina Supreme Court issued a temporary stay and sent it back down to the lower courts to address. Allison Riggs very much needs our support at this moment. By the way, having a Democrat on the North Carolina Supreme Court is critical at this moment in time. So please make sure that you are, if you live in North Carolina, kicking a little money if you can toward Allison Riggs, because she needs the money to litigate this. But also make sure that you're making your voice heard about this attempt by the currently Republican-controlled North Carolina Supreme Court to stop the legitimate election of a Democratic Supreme Court justice. Again, this is way over the line. Very not okay. And in order to win, she's going to need money. So please keep your eye on this one, by the way, because this is a new strategy that seems to be in play by the GOP. Challenging legitimately won elections in the courts is something that Trump ran with in 2020, as we all know. But on the state level, this is something that's happening more and more. So we need to make sure that she wins. All right. Okay, I had some questions on the Patreon feed about what to do on Inauguration Day itself. So I have to remind you all of something, okay? And this is something that I think a lot of people are not aware of. Just simply deciding not to watch the inauguration does not affect ratings, okay? The only way that ratings are affected is if you have signed up to be a Nielsen ratings household and you have a box attached to your television set. So you can't lower his ratings by not watching the inauguration. Now, I've mentioned this before on the broadcast, and I think it's something that is critical to share because there's a lot of people out there, including kind of like some big names on social media, who seem to be telling people that not watching the inauguration is somehow going to have an impact on Trump's ego. It's not. That said, it is Martin Luther King Day. And if you are looking for something to do on Monday, January 20th, I strongly recommend that you take up the usual challenge of Martin Luther King Day and engage in acts of service. This is a really good moment to, by the way, do what I was talking about at the start of this broadcast. Make sure that what you are doing is something that is in service of the principles by which Martin Luther King lived, okay? Great moment to get involved at your local soup kitchen. Great moment to get involved in a local, I don't know, support organization for people who are under threat. Your local LGBTQ support organization, an organization that supports the rights of trans and non-binary youth. There's all sorts of ways to get involved. And, you know, many schools, by the way, even though the day is off, have opportunities for kids to get involved in this stuff too. So please choose something. It can be something small, but, you know, one way to counterbalance what's coming, rather than trying to kind of like, I was about to say something crass, kick Trump in the you-know-whats by not watching, which really he doesn't care about, is to actually do something that forwards a progressive agenda on the ground. Take action. Do something that takes that is a taking of action in the direction of moving the needle, okay? That is something that I would support doing on Inauguration Day instead, okay? Because it actually will make a difference in your community where you live. So that's my recommendation. And, you know, there are people in our community, including people in the current cohort of the Dual Power Accelerator, who have organized protests and various other types of awareness events on this day to raise awareness about the principles that Martin Luther King stood for, rather than drawing attention to Trump. Okay. So think about it from that perspective. Like, please, let's think about it from that perspective, and let's make sure that we are doing what we can from an organizing perspective to make a difference. All right. We had some questions on the Patreon feed about the issue of what's happening in the pushback against California right now. So I want to make something very clear. You know, Trump has made a lot of threats toward Gavin Newsom in recent days. I have done my best not to amplify those because, frankly, they're kind of irrelevant, right? Just like much of what he says, it's just like garbage that he's spewing out on social media. And it doesn't really mean that anything that he's saying is going to come to fruition. This morning, though, there was a Republican rep who gave an interview on like Fox or News Nation, I can't remember which, saying like, well, we'll help you, but you've got to deal with your tax cuts situation. Meaning like you better put more money in the pockets of wealthy people or we will like let you burn. And I suspect that this kind of like, we're going to threaten blue states if they don't comply is something that we have to be prepared for. Jacob Soboroff interviewed Gavin Newsom about this exact issue. The footage is floating around from last night. And Gavin Newsom was essentially like, right, this is what he did the first time around. He was trying to keep PPE out of blue states. He was trying to keep flood relief out of blue states, including in Orange County, where I used to live. Until he was told that there were actual Republicans in a given state who had voted for him. He has already made efforts to kind of like claim that he's not going to provide FEMA support into California because California is a largely blue state. So we do have to take them at their word that there is some kind of like attempt here to put pressure on blue states to give him what he wants. And simultaneously, I do want to point out that Justin Trudeau gave an interview yesterday on Jen Psaki's show. It might have been Friday, actually, but gave an interview on Jen Psaki where essentially he said, I talked to Trump about this issue of like him putting pressure on Canada to try to make us a state, which is very much along the same lines of like, let me pressure blue states until they comply. And he said, well, I told him I would be willing to trade California and Vermont for certain of our provinces. And that's when it stopped becoming a joke. So I have to remind you all that California is like the 5th largest world economy right now. California was able to procure its own PPE from overseas during the pandemic when the federal government would not provide the state what it needed. So it's not like there's no leverage in all of this, right? And it's also not like there isn't a means for particularly Democratic governors and the Democratic Governors Association, which has been preparing for this for 2 months now, to organize themselves to fight back. So again, reminder, I know it can feel a little scary. I know it can feel, like the things that are coming out of his mouth are obscene from a morality standpoint, right? And obscene in other ways sometimes. I will just tell you all that I think the critical thing for us to do right now, everywhere, okay, is to focus on what can be done to fight back. Not focus on the garbage that's coming out of his mouth. Not focus on the nonsense threats that he may not be able to carry through on, but to focus instead on where power lies, right? Because like California has an enormous amount of economic power, right? We, the people, have an enormous amount of power on the ground in our own communities where we live, especially if we're organized in coalitions. And when we focus our attention there instead of on the latest insane and scary thing that he said, we're actually gaining an understanding of the way in which we're going to survive and get through this. Okay. And that's really, I think, kind of critical on quite a number of levels. All right. Somebody asked a question about illegal orders to the military. So here's what we know about this. We know that in the middle of November, after the election had been called, meetings were already beginning inside the DOD so that senior military officials had a strategy for how to respond if and when they were given illegal orders by Donald Trump or his people. One thing I will remind you all of, as General Milley has now stated many, many times, the allegiance of our military is to the Constitution and the American people, not to the president. And that means that even in the military chain of command, there is an understanding that you do not have to carry out an illegal order. Now, does that mean that there might not be certain parts of law enforcement that are going to go along with this? I mean, of course, we know that, for instance, in local police organizations and Customs and Border Patrol, there has been active recruitment into white supremacist organizations for at least the last 15 years. This has been studied and documented and reported on, okay? So we can't count on every single law enforcement related entity to back up and say no when they're given an illegal order. But does the Department of Defense have a plan for this? Well, we don't know what the plan is yet. And we may never know what the plan is, but I can guarantee you that there's a plan in place because they weren't not talking about this to do nothing, right? Or they weren't talking about this to do nothing. They were getting organized for what might come. And so I really want folks to understand that there are still within our government people who are committed to aligning with the Constitution and carrying forward the rule of law. And I know there are going to be some cynics in the comments who are going to be like, again, we're effed, which you all know is like hopelessness, nihilism, death, but not my thing. We have to understand that there are people who still understand what's at stake. And yes, there are threats being made about that now too. That, inside the national security organizations, they're trying to root out people who made donations to Kamala Harris and who have made adverse statements about Donald Trump on social media. And they're looking for reasons to fire people who won't bend the knee. We'll see how successful they are at that effort. All right. But in the interim, the Department of Defense has been preparing for this for at least the last couple of months. And I personally will just tell you that I think that we're going to see some pushback, which we may never know about in real time, by the way, because these things happen behind closed doors and in skiffs, against the prospect of using the American military against the American people. Okay. Last question of the day was about media sources. So I know that we've all got friends who just want the name of a media source that they can rely on. And the unfortunate fact of where we are is that this is very hard to do because so many of the mainstream news sources are now owned by billionaires. And it really comes down to individual reporters and how much of a leash they are given. All right. There are reporters who I rely on, and there are reporters who I consider trustworthy. There really isn't any news source right now, like, big name news source, that I would say is completely without reproach. All right. I've talked previously on this broadcast about how my news consumption has moved very much off of mainstream media and onto Substack in the last couple of months, that I'm not really watching very much mainstream media at all any longer. I did have it on a little bit last week during the fires, but my general preference at this point is to consume directly from reporters and journalists that I find reliable. Those are folks who are in alternative media, much like myself, right? So Wajahat Ali is somebody who I read all the time. I follow Anand Giridharadas. You all know that. I'm a huge fan of his. I follow Mehdi Hasan. I follow him. I follow people like Joyce White Vance and Heather Cox Richardson. I follow various other folks on Substack for their commentary more than their news. All right. But if you're telling your neighbors and your family members where to consume stuff, my preference would be that you tell them to follow particular reporters, not particular media sources. Because if you send them to the Washington Post or the New York Times, they're inevitably going to end up with somebody like Ross Douthat in their inbox telling them that it's fine for the US to annex Canada, right? That's not good, reliable commentary, even though there may be other things on the commentary pages that are fine. So people need to, yes, Jess Craven is another person I follow. There are various ways to tell people who to follow without giving them like a mainstream source. Now, this morning, there was some big breaking news because Jen Rubin has left the Washington Post and is now joining up with Norm Eisen, who used to be the White House ethics czar, to start a new Substack called The Contrarian. It's up to you if you want to go subscribe there. I personally have had to whittle down my Substack subscriptions because I had like 30 and my inbox was flooded every morning. All right. We'll see what they get up to. I will just remind everybody that Jen tends to be more centrist. You have to know the background of the people that you are reading. And, one of the things that we do in our truth or fiction class, which, is a class that you can log into. Let me give you the banner for that. If you want to take it on demand, it's a 4-week class on media literacy. You can sign up today and start it. That if you know what we talk about in that class, you've taken that class, you know that we talk about the importance of vetting individual reporters, not just media sources, but individual reporters. So if you want to do that work for your friends and family, feel free, right? But there are no easy solutions to this right now because we are in a wildly compromised media ecosphere. And I don't think I'm like saying anything that everybody doesn't already know, right? We are living in an environment where there's an enormous amount of disinformation, where the billionaire influence on media sources like the Washington Post, like the LA Times, has been documented ad nauseum during the 2024 election cycle and beyond. And we've got to be extremely cautious about who we read. And even when we're reading people, understand what their own internal bias may be, right? Like I know the stuff I'm going to get from the Bulwark, which is run by a bunch of never Trumpers, is going to be really different than what I'm going to get from Mehdi Hasan's channel because he's far left. So having some nuance to this is really important. And I will just say that I have one other word of warning here, okay? One of the things that we have to be really cautious about right now from the standpoint of the response to what's coming is if we don't understand the perspective of the people that we're reading, it will play as normalization. It might even play as capitulation in advance. So it is important to know if you're reading someone who's a centrist. Because if you're reading someone who's a centrist, that may mean that they may find certain things acceptable that maybe most people on the progressive wing would not. And I'm talking specifically about commentary here. But please understand that even people who are reporting the facts are reporting them through their own lens of internal bias, right? The way that you report on the response to the fires in Los Angeles, this prime immediate example, depends very much on whether or not you're going to buy into conspiracy theories, for instance, that like there was something wrong with the water supply and pressure and everything else, or whether you're willing to actually do the deep dive investigative reporting of the fact that the reservoirs, even when full, were not designed to handle entire neighborhoods going up in smoke at once. So again, you've got to be really thoughtful about who you're reading and who you recommend. All right. And one of the things that I just really want people to be careful about, very careful about, particularly once Trump is in office, is the person that I am reading someone who is reliable, someone whose perspective I can identify, someone who I know is coming at this through a lens of care, someone who abides by journalistic standards of ethics. Okay. Don't get your news from some random Yahoo on Blue Sky or wherever with 16 numbers after their name. Okay. Don't get your news from Facebook like ever. If you're going to get your news, make sure it's from reliable reporters who are ethical and you understand the lens through which they are reporting and commenting. Okay. You all know what my perspective is on this, right? Like you all know who I am. You can go look me up, right? Just like you should be looking up everybody else. So please exercise caution about media consumption right now, and particularly after the inauguration. But you should have been doing it the whole way through 2024, which is why we ran that course and continue to run it. Okay, that's it for today, my friends. It is Monday. Again, we are 1 week away from the inaugural. If you are scared, if you are worried, if you are not sure what to do, I just want to mention, like, we've got you. The Dual Power Accelerator is a training program for 10 weeks on how to organize your community for solidarity, safety, survival, and community. Please, if you are interested in joining us, you can get in between now and February 4th. The second cohort starts on February 4th. Lots of people in the comments are in that class. They can tell you how fantastic it is and what amazing results people have had. The things that people are doing in this course, oh my God, will blow your mind. And the community is wonderful. So please consider joining us if you have not yet done so. And I will be here all week. And quick reminder that my Fridays in Trumpland series is up on my own personal Substack, coming in every Friday morning. And you can go find that at newsletterwithecm.substack.com. That's also linked in the box below. All right, my friends, I will catch you all here tomorrow, regular time. Have a wonderful Monday. And don't forget to call your senators about these nominations. Like, please do it. All right, I'll see you all here tomorrow. Take care. Bye.